When I was just a kid, my parents never stopped fighting. It was because of my dad's cheating. He was handsome and competent at his job, so I guess people around him couldn't resist. Despite getting caught multiple times, he never stopped cheating. It was as if he was pushing my mom's limits. By the time I turned 5, Mom reached her breaking point. I remember crying and yelling,
"How selfish can you be? You ask me to leave just because you got a child with another woman. What about Sarah, then?"
Enough. Sarah's already 5. The new one's just been born.
So what? Don't you remember who did you marry?
I said, I'll support you guys. Just understand it already.
Even at that young age, I could sense how self-centered his arguments were. A dad who had a child with another woman while still having his wife. A mom pressured by my dad to divorce for his mistress and their child. Amid the chaos, I'd wonder, what's that child like? Eventually, Mom left Dad and moved out. Since then, I've never seen my father. After high school, I immediately started working. I wanted to help my mom as soon as possible. At first, I worked in a supermarket, managing stock and restocking shelves. I wasn't great with customers. After about 6 months, I started studying for the bookkeeping certification, heavily encouraged by a part-time older lady. Once I got that certification, my job prospects widened, and I luckily started working at my current company. I'm not particularly skilled. The only reason I kept my job was the support from those around me. Being diligent and reserved, my colleagues often looked out for me. I was fortunate with the employees in my office as well. And then I got someone special at work. A guy from the sales department, Bob Smith. If it wasn't for Bob, I might not have come to terms with my mom's death. Yes, she passed away suddenly due to a severe illness when I was 21. I can't forget the words she repeatedly told me while lying in her hospital bed.
Cherish your bonds with others.
Bob was with me during those final moments.
Leave Sarah to me. I'll take care of her forever,
he said. Amid the grief, Mom managed a small smile before she took her last breath. Growing up witnessing my parents' strained relationship, thanks to Bob, I experienced a happy married life. We were blessed with children, and after maternity leave, I could safely return to the same department. Balancing work and parenting isn't easy at all. Once again, the understanding and cooperation from those around me were invaluable. Sorry, manager. Just got a call from the daycare. My kids come down with a fever.
That stuff. Go right away. I'll handle your pending work.
Hey, manager. I'll be free in about 10 minutes. Just let me know whatever you need.
I'll be finishing up soon too. Sarah, hurry up and take over with him.
Yes, thank you all so much. Many of them were married, so they were understanding. But even aside from that, I felt truly blessed to be surrounded by such people. However, those happy moments didn't last long. One day, out of the blue, Bob passed away. It was a car accident during working hours. Now, like my mother, I have become a single parent. I didn't have the luxury of dwelling in my sorrow. Parenting and work won't wait for me to stop crying. I turned the condolences and encouragement from my colleagues into strengths and started working hard again. A few months later, to fill the gap left by Bob, a new recruit joined our sales team.
My name is Camila Johnson. Nice to meet you all.
A stunning beauty and a capable salesperson with many accomplishments, Camila Johnson. Rumor had it she was well known in the industry, and the boss was thrilled she had joined us. And indeed, her skills were the real deal. Within 6 months of joining, she clinched several major deals in succession. Soon she was a part of the decision-making process in our department, and 2 years later, she was leading it. Camila had a captivating charm about her, and she knew it. She had an uncanny ability to understand what people wanted and adapt to them. Some employees felt she was standoffish, while others felt she favored them. It seemed she adjusted her attitude based on their enthusiasm and interest in her. What's more, she did it so naturally that it never felt obnoxious. Most employees were taken in by Camila. except for a few like me. I did my best to avoid interacting with her. I wanted to keep my distance. She probably noticed my aversion. After all, I wasn't as good at hiding my feelings as she was. The office became divided between the vast majority who were pro-Camila and a small minority who weren't. It was around this time that the economic downturn began to cast a dark shadow on the company's performance. Salaries and infrastructure investments were affected, and the atmosphere at the company gradually deteriorated. It was painful to feel the growing discontent among my colleagues. Backbiting increased, and people became more abrasive in their language. Some even began openly berating one another. Worse, no one seemed to want to step in. Most just turned a blind eye. Then came a proposal that only added to the chaos. It was from Camila.
Let's boost our strengths through interdepartmental personnel exchange.
She said the goal was to rebuild as a resilient company, ready for any situation. Unfortunately, I was chosen for this personnel exchange and was assigned to the sales team led by her. What I learned in sales was just how unsuited I was for it. That's about it. Being passive, wearing my emotions on my sleeve, and lacking in sociability weren't exactly assets in sales. But that didn't mean I could just sit around. I had targets to meet, and failure to achieve them would label me incompetent.
Why can't you handle even such simple tasks? I really don't get it.
Camila would sometimes throw such blatant sarcastic remarks my way. And once she started, there was no stopping her. There wasn't a single ally for me within the team. Nobody would defend me from her.
Isn't your work just too slow? I wish you'd pick up the pace. People won't like you if you're so standoffish. You know, it's all about the sales smile. Got it. Please, can you at least follow through with what you say? Can you stop dragging us down? You're so useless.
Almost every day, I was bombarded with these harsh words, and my motivation to work plummeted. But I couldn't take any days off. If I failed, I wouldn't be able to make ends meet. I needed to keep working for the sake of a happy life with my child. Back then, I believe my focus was more on protecting myself than on my job. I was constantly thinking about how to avoid any sarcastic comments from Camila or even how to avoid seeing her altogether. There were quite a few employees who were going through the same struggles as me. All of them were not by her side, and many of them were either mentally distressed or deeply hurt. Naturally, the number of employees quitting increased. No farewell parties were held. No words of encouragement were given. The company's performance kept declining, and things became increasingly disorganized. One day, I was summoned to the boss's office. Wondering what the boss wanted, I asked, and there she was.
You finally made it. Aren't you always so slow?
It was Camila. She seemed very close to the boss, too close for comfort.
We happened to talk about you, and since Miss Camila wanted to confirm something directly, so.
What on earth did they want to confirm? When our eyes met, she gave me a mocking laugh.
Sarah, is it true you only have a high school diploma?
What? Yes, I do, but…
No way. There really are people like that here. Well, I guess that can't be helped then.
What couldn't be helped? Camila, smiling smugly, reported to the boss.
I'll reorganize the interdepartmental collaboration teams, adding the information that she only has a high school diploma.
The boss, who couldn't argue against their star performer, reluctantly seemed to agree. All right. Then she approached me and whispered in my ear.
Sorry, I don't need a high school grad in my team. Well then, boss, we'll be on our way.
I was ushered out of the boss's office by her. The corridor was empty, just the two of us. This is exactly the situation I had hoped to avoid.
The performance of my team, the one formed through interdepartmental collaboration, was at the bottom.
Is that so?
It's not just is that so. Who do you think is to blame for that?
She was insinuating it was all my fault. I believe a team should help cover for members who might be struggling. Is it really possible for a company to grow by only keeping the competent ones? She was swapping out team members aggressively for her own objectives. I was completely fed up.
What's with that look?
Nothing really.
If you go against me, you'll be fired. For someone like me now, that's pretty easy, you know.
After hearing such words, I made up my mind. There are other companies out there. I don't have any reason to stay and suffer here. The next day, I handed in my resignation to the boss. What surprised me was that upon hearing of my departure, many others followed suit. Most of them were female office workers who often interacted with me.
If you are leaving, we're leaving too. We can't stand the way this company operates anymore.
I was taken aback. I didn't realize that I was someone people looked up to. The news that several female employees, including myself, were quitting spread like wildfire throughout the company. The higher-ups weren't pleased, but we remained firm in our decision. On my last day at work,
Wait, Sarah?
someone called out to me as I was leaving the office. It was Camila. She was running towards me, looking distressed. I knew that recently she had become the scapegoat for the company's issues. Part of the reason the company lost so many employees was due to her. The company seemed to have finally recognized that.
I've been talking to HR about the people who are quitting.
Why, trying to find reasons to persuade us to stay.
I apologize for prying into personal details without permission. I'm sorry.
I was about to leave, but she stopped me with her loud voice.
Why did you keep silent? Didn't you notice, sis?
Sis. I turned around to face her once more. Yes, I had noticed from the beginning. The surname Johnson she had before marriage. The age difference between us. Her facial features. And most importantly, the self-centered nature, so much like my father. She is my half-sister. Surprisingly, tears began to stream down her face.
My dad and mom are both gone due to illness. I've always lived alone.
Then, she began to speak in bits and pieces. She found out at some point that she was a child born out of her father's cheating. She couldn't be proud of her birth, resented her irresponsible and promiscuous parents, and grew up without trusting anyone. All she had was a rebellious attitude towards her parents and thoughts of how to use those around her to get by. She's come this far by not opening up to anyone, using her talents and charm as her weapons.
But I've reached my limit. It's the same no matter where I work. In the end, people always leave.
You can't fool me with that. You're always thinking about yourself, not caring about others.
But you are the only family I have now. If you also leave me,
Camila, with tears streaming down, I spoke to. About everything since my parents got divorced.
Cherish your bonds with others.
With those words, my mom left me. I've lived earnestly till now. I might be leaving the company, but I'm not alone. I have a child and connections with friends. The child is a testament to the deep connection between Bob and me. Unbreakable bonds with friends prove it too. It's evidence that I've always valued relationships with others. You might want to think about others too, not just pity yourself all the time.
think about others too.
Just that might change a lot.
Though, Sarah.
I started walking, leaving her sobbing behind. I never looked back. Later on, I did something I never imagined I'd do after resigning. I reached out to trustworthy colleagues, and together, we started a new company. Thanks to the many skilled members who joined, our performance improved year by year. On the other hand, the company I used to work for couldn't recover from its poor performance and eventually went bankrupt. Several years have passed. To our surprise, an unexpected individual came in for a job interview.
My name is Camila Johnson.
Meeting her after such a long time, her eyes seemed strangely clearer and more straightforward than before.
I'd like to start from scratch and learn everything here. Please give me a chance.
She looked completely sincere. There was no reason to refuse. Everyone faces setbacks at some point in their lives. My colleagues and I welcomed her and took a new step forward together.
In this cemetery overlooking the sea, 1,000 snowdrop trees are planted, and during the peak season, one can witness breathtaking scenic views with the blue sea in the background. Right now, the flowers have not fully bloomed yet, and the branches have just begun to be tinted faintly white. The grave where my parents rest is a little removed from the main section, located in a quiet spot where a large snowdrop tree stands. The sea can also be seen in the distance. They bloomed again this year. I touch the warm trunk of the old tree and sigh with relief. Lately, visiting the grave in this season has become something of an annual event. My name is Thomas Palmer, 29 years old. This spring, I graduated with a master's degree. I will soon return to my grandfather's home in New York and will start working for a pharmaceutical company in April. Today, I came here to report this to my parents. In front of the grave, I offered my father's favorite canned beer and donuts for my mother, who loved sweets, and sat under the sunflower tree facing the grave, drinking my own beer. A bit early for a snowdrop viewing, isn't it? A comfortable spring breeze caresses my cheeks. Suddenly, I saw the figure of an elderly woman walking towards me. I quickly stood up and squinted. Mrs. Adams. Mrs. Adams is the head mistress of Sea of Light Home, a children's care facility about 15 minutes drive from this cemetery.
Oh my, Thomas.
She stopped in surprise and then walked slowly over. I hadn't seen her since last summer, so only about half a year had passed, but she looked like she'd aged quite a bit.
What a coincidence. I'm so happy to see you, Thomas. How have you been?
She took my hand and squinted with joy. The wrinkles at the corners of her eyes, her charm point, had deepened. Yes, sorry I haven't kept in touch. Are you well, Mrs. Adams?
Yes, same as usual. Surrounded by children. It's a hustle and bustle every day,
she said while arranging the flowers she brought. Thank you for always coming, for the flowers, and everything else.
It's okay, I like it here and feel comfortable coming. Oh, an old lady coming to the grave voluntary. How funny.
She laughed at her own words. And after visiting my parents' grave, she said, if you have time, why don't you stop by home? I have something to give you, and gave me a ride in her car. Descending from the hilltop cemetery, the previous silence disappeared, and the colorful city landscape, eagerly awaiting the arrival of spring, jumped into view. The car drove through the city and approached the coastal road.
So, did you get your room cleaned up? Sorry, I couldn't help you with that,
she said, looking out the driver's side window. No, I didn't have much stuff anyway. Would you mind if we stop here for a moment? I bought cream puffs as souvenirs for the children at a pastry shop we found along the way. You didn't have to. She hesitated, but then put her hands together in front of her face, saying, but the kids will love it, thank you. As we drove along the coastline with mountains to our right, a small fishing harbor soon appeared in a narrow bay. Then we climbed a little up the hill to the children's care facility, Sea of Light Home. From the hilltop facility, you can see several fishing boats in the harbor, some fishermen and fishers at work on the breakwater, and a beautiful port town spread out below. Here, children who have lost parents, or who need care due to abuse or neglect, are accommodated and supported for independence after leaving. Now, 14 children from ages 3 to high school live here. Passing by a wooden signboard with paint peeling off and hard to read, I walked through the gate. The day my father died, I was also brought here in a car from the facility and walked through this gate. I lived here for only a month when I was 10, but the anxiety and pain in my chest from that time are still vivid in my memory. I also clearly remember the warmth when Mrs. Adams said, "It's okay," and hugged me, trembling and small. Even now, thinking about it almost brings tears to my eyes. Mrs. Adams dropped me off in front of the entrance, saying, "Go inside and wait," and went to park the car. I was about to enter the building when I suddenly looked at the small playground next to the building. I found a boy around 3rd or 4th grade, sitting alone on a piece of playground equipment slide. I saw myself in him at that age. My mother passed away from illness when I was very young. Since then, my father, a construction worker, raised me all by himself. That night, my father was going to be late because of overtime. "I'll be home by 9," he promised, and I waited for him by doing homework and watching TV. I had dozed off and was awakened by the loud sound of a fire truck siren. The time was a little past 10. The TV, left on, had switched to a news program. Strong winds from the ocean were rattling the poorly built windows of our apartment. I felt a sudden unease and called my father's cell, but there was no answer. When anxiety had begun to take over, I heard a knock at the door. "Dad?" I leaped up and rushed to the door. When I opened the door, there was an unfamiliar middle-aged woman and a police officer who asked, "Are you Thomas Johnson?" I don't remember much after that. When I came to, I was in the arms of Mrs. Adams. That night, on his way home, my father noticed flames coming from the 2nd floor of a fishing lodge near our home. A guest's careless smoking had caused a fire. Fanned by the strong winds, the fire grew more fierce. There had been 2 other fires that day, and the fire trucks were delayed. Hearing from the lodge's staff that someone was trapped, my father rushed in alone. Soon after, he emerged from the entrance, carrying the trapped person. Both were taken to the hospital by the arriving paramedics. The person my father had saved seemed to have severe burns but survived. But my father, during the rescue, a falling beam struck him in the back, and he died in the ambulance before reaching the hospital. I heard all of this much later from the lodge's landlady.
That was around the time you came here, Thomas.
Turning around to the voice, Mrs. Adams was standing at the threshold, apparently having come through the back door from the parking lot, looking at the boy just like me. As I kept watching him, who was called by a female staff member, and returned to his room, Mrs. Adams said, "Here you go," and handed me slippers. I was led into the principal's office and seated on a sofa, sipping the coffee that had been prepared for me, when the principal came in with a small photo album.
Sorry to keep you waiting. I found these old photos while organizing paperwork the other day. I thought I'd give them to you before you head back to New York.
The principal said that and took out a photograph. It was a picture of 10-year-old me and my grandfather, who lived in New York, standing in front of the entrance to this facility. This?
Do you remember? We took it the day you left.
Both of us were glaring at the camera with expressions that were hard to read, whether we were smiling or angry. My grandfather was only 70 at the time, standing taller and looking younger. I remember, I didn't know what face to make, and I was really troubled. I think my grandfather felt the same. I said with a laugh,
Your grandfather must have been lonely after you went to college here, right? When you went back for your job offer ceremony last year, you were in a rush because of your busy research, weren't you?
I carefully put the photo into my jacket's breast pocket.
You have to take care of your grandfather when you get back.
Right, I replied and finished drinking the rest of my coffee. Before heading to the waiting room after completing the boarding process, I called my grandfather.
Thomas, what's up? You already in New York?
My grandfather answered the phone in a raspy voice, almost sounding angry. I'm about to board the plane now. I'll be in New York in the evening. Did my luggage arrive?
Yeah, I carried it into your room. By the way, Thomas.
Huh?
Are you sure you really made the right decision taking a job here?
What? Why would you say that?
Never mind. Just be careful on your way home. I'll have someone pick you up at the airport.
Grandpa abruptly hung up the phone. Not again. He always holds back on saying what's truly important. He's been like that since I was a child.
Your soda's going to be lukewarm,
he said, looking at me gripping my can of soda. I'd been so nervous, even forgot to take a sip. The zoo on a weekday was nearly empty, and even the popular animal enclosures were available. The morning after Grandpa had brought me to New York from the facility, he woke me up, saying, "We're going to the zoo." I bought a carbonated drink from a shop at the resting corner near the primate enclosure and sat across from him on a bench. I drank the soda nervously. He watched me drink, squinting his eyes, as if watching a panda munching on bamboo. Suddenly, I spotted a mother and baby chimpanzee. Look, a baby chimpanzee. I left my half-finished soda and ran to the enclosure. A nearby zookeeper explained that this wasn't the real mother, but a female chimpanzee with birthing experience was caring for the baby, whose real mother had died of illness. Grandpa, who had quietly come to stand beside me, said,
"I wonder if that baby is truly happy."
When I responded with maybe, he asked, "Why do you think so?" I was about to say something when he cut me off, saying, "Well, never mind," and started to walk away. I couldn't call back this old man, whose name I still didn't know what to call, and I followed him, feeling as if I'd done something wrong. When I reached the arrival lobby at the airport, Harrison was there, waiting, and ran up to me. He has been Grandpa's secretary and driver since I was little.
"Welcome back, Thomas."
Harrison, with his small frame, gave me a big hug with a beaming smile. "I'm back. Thanks for coming to get me, Harrison." The freeway was congested.
"Your grandfather has been eagerly awaiting your return,"
Harrison said, with a knowing smile. "How's his health?"
"Yes, he received a clean bill of health at his last checkup."
That's a relief. I relaxed into the seat.
"He's always been confident about his physical strength since he was young. Remember, your last elementary school field day."
Harrison spoke to me through the rearview mirror. I saw Grandpa sitting in the guest seat. Harrison was beside him, holding a video camera. I was at the start line of the obstacle race, nervous. I had promised Grandpa the night before that I'd come in first place. Losing was not an option. The race began with the sound of the starting pistol. Everyone took off at once, clearing obstacles one after the other. Finally, we had to pick a piece of paper from a box and find the object written on it to reach the goal. I was in the lead and pulled a paper. It read your favorite person or thing. I looked around, bewildered. During that time, the other kids who were behind caught up and passed me. I made up my mind and stood before my grandfather. "Grandpa, come on." He said, "All right," and took my hand and ran. We came in third place. I was somehow very happy.
"I can still run more,"
he said, panting, and slumped at the finish line.
"Aren't you completely worn out?"
Harrison laughed as he recorded my grandfather, and then he zoomed in on the paper I was holding and asked, "What's written on this paper?" Suddenly, Harrison said, "Something got in my eye," and went away somewhere. Do you still have that video you took at that time?
Yes, of course. Would you like to watch it with your grandfather later?
Nah, that's fine. He chuckled. The 0.2-acre property with a pure Japanese-style mansion looked like a temple or inn from the outside. With its stone walls and white plaster, roofed Japanese gate, and artfully arranged pine and bamboo plants in the garden. As a young boy living in a small apartment, I felt uneasy in this large mansion at first and spent all my time playing in the garden, while imitating my grandfather and feeding the carps in the pond. I was staggered to hear from Harrison that a single carp could cost tens of thousands of dollars.
These beautiful carps and garden were cared for by your late grandmother. So, Thomas, please love them.
Harrison said, looking lovingly at the garden. I remember it like it was yesterday. Getting out of the car and passing through the gate, Mrs. Smith was waiting outside the entrance. She is the housekeeper of this house, a talented cook in her late 50s, and someone I adore like a mother. Mrs. Smith, I'm home. Glad to see you're well.
Thomas, welcome back. I made all your favorite dishes for dinner,
she said, pushing me on the back.
Now, your grandfather is waiting for you.
He was reading a book in his study. I'm back now.
Welcome back from your long trip. You must be tired. Take a rest.
He said only that and returned his gaze to the book. Has he lost weight? His voice seems to lack vigor. I became a little worried. How's your health?
Oh, I'm fine. The doctor just told me you don't look 84 the other day.
My grandfather said, taking off his reading glasses.
How about you? Must have been tough researching at the university.
Then he continued.
Developing medicine is a painful job that requires constant patience and effort. You could have taken an easier and more glamorous job.
I want to do something useful for people.
Still concerned about what I told you when I took you in?
My grandfather said when he took me in, I'll let you study anything you want. Just become someone who can be useful to others. As a child, I somehow took it as a condition to become part of my grandfather's family. If I study hard and become a doctor or a lawyer, would he be pleased? I used to think about that, but now it's different. Now, driven by a stronger feeling, I want to pour everything into drug development. Bram Purdy. At that moment, Mrs. Smith's voice came from beyond the door.
Dinner's ready.
Let's go. She has cooked just for you,
he said as he stood up and left the room. On the morning of the first day at work, dressed in a brand new suit, I greeted my grandfather. I'm leaving now, he said. You've got this, as he sent me off. Harrison had offered to drive me, but I had decided to commute by train, so I declined. Smith adjusted my tie, patted my shoulders, and said, "Good luck with the new employee's greeting," giving me a thumbs up. On the first day at work, the 130 new employees who had beaten high competition looked tense. The presidents gave us a speech, followed by the awarding of appointments, introductions of executives and department heads, and finally, the new employees' greetings. I was introduced by my boss as Thomas Palmer, the new employee representative assigned to the Pharmaceutical Research Institute of the Research Department, and got ready for the speech. Before the speech, I expressed my greetings to the president and my bosses. In my speech, I revealed a feeling I have always had since I was 14. 10 years ago, a dear family member suffered from a life-threatening illness. Fortunately, they had surgery, and there's been no recurrence, and they are now living healthily. But we never know when illness might strike again. I decided that I never want to see anyone fight against illness alone. So, I studied pharmacology in college to cure that disease. I want to use my emotions and experience to create sincere medicine for all those suffering from illnesses and those who hold the thought, I don't want to lose my loved ones, with all my might. I was applauded by my colleagues and bosses. After work, we went to a restaurant for dinner together. I enjoyed food and conversation with fellow new employees from the same research department, whom I had met at the job offer ceremony.
I was touched by your speech earlier. Bravo!
Suddenly, a young boss applauded and called out to me. I thanked him, confused, saying, "Thank you."
How on earth could you come up with such a made-up story? Don't show off just because it's in front of the president.
He, perhaps drunk, had a glazed look and snatched the champagne I was holding and chugged it.
Reality isn't that simple. How many years do you think it will take to develop a drug? You, who knows nothing, don't talk about something like dreams, you idiot.
I glared at him and said, "Nobody can predict the future. Perhaps tomorrow, we may find a clue to a cure for an intractable disease. That's what attracted me to pharmacology." He looked incredulous and sighed.
Which college did you go? I bet it was some low-tier college.
My young boss, who had graduated from a top private university and worked as a medical representative with top sales, talked incessantly about things I hadn't even asked. That's impressive. I'm from a university in Nebraska.
Ha! You graduated from a pharmaceutical department in Nebraska, and you got into this company? It's a miracle. A miracle. But I would love to see the face of a parent who could only send their child to such a college.
My parents have nothing to do with it. I chose that college myself. I was patted my head by him, was said, "Sore losing is unbecoming." And I was laughed loudly. At that moment, I felt a presence behind us.
What's going on with my grandson?
A sudden voice made me turn around in surprise, and my grandfather, who was supposed to be at home, was standing there with Harrison and other executives. "Grandpa," Harrison smiled and said, "Indeed, he wanted to see your big day, so I brought him here. You gave a grand speech. It was splendid." My young boss laughed even louder, saying, "What? You brought a guardian here?" Grandpa frowned and yelled at the still confused him, "Call your boss here right now." His boss, the sales manager, came running, his face red with embarrassment.
You. What are you doing? This gentleman here is our company's chairman, Jason Palmer, and that new employee over there is his family.
My young boss stumbled and looked at me, saying, What is going on?" Then heard another voice from behind.
"Thomas, what happened? Are you all right?"
I turned around to see the president standing there. "Uncle James, I mean, Mr. President." My brother actually said James, my beloved childhood figure and the sole son of my grandpa, the president of Palmer Pharmaceuticals, hugging my shoulders. He said, "I've got no complaints about the son of the man who saved my father's life," and laughed. He had affectionately watched over me since adopting me as a child when I lost my parents.
Well, what?
He was overwhelmed by surprise, stumbled, grabbed a nearby tablecloth, and fell dramatically. The sound of breaking dishes and screams filled the room.
What are you doing, you fool?
The sales manager yelled even louder in anger. As Harrison helped him, now covered in some kind of sauce, to his feet, he added,
And let me tell you, Thomas Palmer's College is not just any local university. It's one of the prestigious state universities. Thomas admired a professor there since high school and wanted to study under him, seeing his research up close. So don't talk like you know everything.
I was a bit shocked to hear the usually gentle Harrison speak angrily.
I am sorry.
Looking down, the senior employee mumbled his apology, and Grandpa spoke up.
Being a medical representative is busy and stressful, with so much knowledge to acquire. But if someone who sells healing medicines hurts others, it's no good at all. Take some time to reflect on yourself, your job, and your heart.
He apologized sincerely. After the commotion, Grandpa and I were on the rooftop terrace of the restaurant. The place is filled with plants of various sizes and grass growing at our feet. There are timber-laid walkways and wooden benches here and there. It was such a pleasant place, filled with sky and greenery, that it was easy to forget we were on a restaurant rooftop. We sat on a bench in an observation area with a view of the city skyline. I hope he doesn't get into too much trouble, I murmured, and Grandpa chuckled.
You were the same when you first came to live with us, getting into a brawl during a school visit. But in the end, you were concerned about the other person. You've always been a kind child.
That day was a school visit, and Grandpa had come to watch. I had been called a country bumpkin by the guy sitting next to me, who had teased me in a whisper during class, saying, "Your dad looks like your grandpa." In my anger, I stood up and shoved him. I said, "He's not my dad. He's my grandpa," I yelled, and we ended up in a fist fight. Naturally, the class was interrupted. The teacher was furious, and the other parents were in an uproar when Grandpa shouted,
"Good, good. Men should be like this."
Then he laughed loudly. Everyone else started laughing, and the atmosphere instantly relaxed. Grandpa. On the way home from school, I called him like that for the first time as we walked together. He turned around and said, "What's up?" I felt happy somehow and said, "I hope he doesn't get scolded too much." He patted my head and said, smiling, "Getting hungry. Let's go home." Yeah, I remember that, but it must have been because I was happy. And then I continued. I was happy enough to care about others, both then and now. It's all thanks to you, Grandpa. He looked at the distant scenery and smiled. Then he asked, "How did you find out about the illness?" "Well, of course I know. We live together. You lied about going to a spa for a treatment and came back after surgery as if nothing had happened, but your diet changed and you lost a lot of weight. Plus, the medicine. I looked up the medication you were taking on the internet." He said, impressed, "Really? Why didn't you tell me about the illness? Is it because I'm not your real family?" Then he thought for a moment and continued, "I didn't want to burden you. I wanted you to live freely without being tied to anything. I thought that's what your father would have wanted too." And he went on,
When you said you were going to take the college entrance exam in your hometown, I felt both happy and sad that you were growing up and leaving my side to return home. I thought I might have returned the favor to your father.
Return the favor. I looked at his face. He had tears in his eyes.
Thomas, I'm sorry for keeping this from you. Actually, I am. The one your father saved from the fire 14 years ago is.
You're the one Dad saved, right? He turned to me.
How did you know?
I kind of figured Maybe that was it. When I was a kid, I saw it by chance. When you were changing your clothes, there were big burn scars from your shoulder to arm.
I'm so sorry.
Suddenly, he rose from the bench, fell to his knees, and broke down in tears.
If only I hadn't been too late to escape, your father would have survived. Forgive me, please.
I knelt down in front of my trembling grandpa, who was almost in a position of groveling. Why are you apologizing? I was so happy to be taken in by you, Grandpa. I was really happy that Dad saved you, Grandpa. I've never held a grudge. And then I continued, I'm truly grateful that you fought your illness alone so you wouldn't worry me. Thank you for being alive and for being by my side. Thank you, Grandpa. He cried out in pain and wept. Several years later, I was absorbed in developing new drugs. Mrs. Smith continues to work as a maid even in her old age. Make sure you eat properly, no matter how busy you are, she told me, preparing a nutritious packed lunch for me every day. Mr. Harrison has retired, but he comes every day to take care of the carps and tend to the plants. Grandpa passed away last year. He passed away peacefully, sitting in a chair on the porch of this mansion, looking out at his beloved garden and carp pond. He left me this house and a letter. In it, his sincere feelings for me were expressed in simple, unadorned words. He wanted to live with me and watch over me more. He wanted to talk about many things. And at the end, it was written,
Follow the path you believe in without hesitation. Even if it's a rough path, it will be a bright one, and I will be watching over you with your parents.
I carried this letter with me like a charm. Then, time passed further. Spring. There is a newspaper in front of his portrait. The headline in the newspaper reads, Palmer Pharmaceuticals' new drug, clinical trials begin. The full bloom of white snowdrops is breathtaking against the blue of the sea. On the mountain path leading to the cemetery, snowdrop petals are spread out like a carpet, and the occasional strong sea breeze lifts them into the air, creating a fantastical scene with the light of spring.
Papa, get me the hat.
My daughter Maya chases after the hat that flew my way. My wife, Catherine, chases after her, laughing and saying, You'll fall if you run. I pick up the hat, put it on Maya's head, and give her a shoulder ride. Maya is frolicking above my head, reaching for the snowdrops. I've taken a long vacation for the first time in a while and brought my family to my hometown, Nebraska, to visit my parents' graves. At the gravesite, I told my parents that I was living happily, so they could rest assured. Maya also puts her small hands together with a solemn face. Looking up at an old tree that still blooms every year, I said to Catherine, who was by my side, This snowdrop tree is quite old, but it's still blooming every year. She touched the trunk.
It's warm.
I reached out to the trunk too. At that moment, I felt as though I was touching Grandpa. Tears welled up naturally. Catherine looked at me and asked, What's wrong? But I wiped my tears and said, It's nothing. I feel that my parents and Grandpa, who are always by my side watching over me, are still with me. The strength of my father who risked his life to save others, and my grandfather who showered me, his adopted child, with unconditional love. With their love in my heart, I am determined to live to the fullest for my beloved family and for anyone who needs my strength. Snowdrops fall again in the wind, and then gently land. I watched Catherine and Maya playing with the petals, feeling truly blessed. My name is Kevin. When I was a kid, my mother passed away, leaving just my father and me. Dad worked in construction, so he left early in the morning and returned late at night. Back in elementary school, I couldn't afford the popular games or comics that other kids had. This led to being frequently teased for being po, even in high school. I often wondered why we were so po or why I didn't have a mother like everyone else, sometimes crying about it. But I knew how hard my father worked, clumsily learning household chores and raising me with everything he had. After my mother's departure, he always tried his best not to make me feel lonely. On days off, he'd always take me out. On birthdays, he'd buy me games I wanted but could never ask for, or bake me a cake, even if it looked a little funny. Seeing the way my father lived, I started dreaming of becoming a respectable man like him someday.
What are your plans for your future?
My dad once asked. I'm currently a junior in high school. I replied, I'm thinking of working after high school, Dad. He was taken aback, worrying if he had pushed me too hard. He insisted, I've saved enough for you to go to college, son. I know I can still study without heading to college and I'll learn better through real-life experiences. I responded. At first, my dad was lost for words but eventually respected my decision. Job hunting was tough. While working part-time, I tirelessly looked for a full-time job. I took some certification courses and finally managed an interview at a small local company. The interviewer wasn't impressed with my high school diploma, but the boss seemed to like me, and I got the job. At first, I handled simple tasks and paperwork, but thanks to my diligence, I started gaining recognition from my colleagues. However, some became jealous.
What's this high school grad thinking, working so hard? He's probably trying to suck up to the boss.
It was often frustrating. I wanted to respond, but nothing could change my educational background. I was disheartened, but there were a few who genuinely appreciated me, so I kept pushing through. It was tough, though. That was around the time. Then there was this supervisor, Mr. Anderson. He'd mock my background, saying things like,
You're just a high school grad, huh? Impressive you've lasted this long.
Or, I'm surprised a high school grad like you can even get certified. Kudos to you. With a sarcastic laugh. He didn't use direct insults, but he often mentioned my lack of education. I felt stressed with every such encounter but kept reminding myself to prove my worth through my work. Besides Mr. Anderson, there were others who'd ridicule me out of pure jealousy. But every time they did, Anderson would show up saying, This high school grad won't ever match up to you guys. Forget him, let's grab some lunch. And he'd lead the others away. It was tough to fit in with the rest, but around that time, I met Catherine, who later became my wife. She was technically my senior at work, but we clicked instantly. She was a cheerful woman who, despite sometimes having a sharp tongue, was always a great listener. She'd often invite me out for drinks or treat me to some burgers after work. Being around Catherine made all my worries seem trivial, and before I knew it, we were laughing things off together. She had that kind of energy. When I talked to her about Anderson's teasing, she said, What's his problem? As long as you do your job, your background doesn't matter. Anderson's the real fool. You'll prove him wrong someday. She'd slap my back and cheer me on. Catherine's presence was a huge comfort to me, and as time went on, I found myself drawn to Catherine more than just a colleague. It was my first love. We started meeting outside of work, and before long, we were spending our days off together. By the time I reached my 5th year at the company, I confessed my feelings to Catherine. Catherine, I really like you. I know I'm younger and might seem unreliable, but would you consider dating me?
Your face is so red. Sure, let's date.
And with a shy smile, Catherine agreed. After we started dating, it would not be an exaggeration to say that those were the happiest times Kevin had ever experienced in his life. 2 years into our relationship, I proposed to Catherine. After giggling, she made a big circle with her hand. I was so happy I could have cried. When we went to visit our parents' homes, my dad tearfully said to Catherine, "I have such a wonderful son. Please make him happy." And for some reason, he was bowing deeply to her. Catherine patted my dad on the back and said with a big grin, "Leave it to me," which made me wonder if she was the one joining my family. When we submitted our marriage license, we held hands and walked home, laughing and saying, "From today, we're not just senior and junior, or lovers, but husband and wife." We decided to have a wedding ceremony. We wanted to thank and make happy all the people who had helped us, Catherine's parents, and especially my dad. At the wedding, we invited our families, the CEO, a few colleagues, and also Anderson. To be honest, I didn't really want to invite Anderson, but Catherine insisted. "We should send Anderson an invitation too," she said firmly. To be honest, I was a bit perplexed, but since Catherine was so insistent, we decided to invite Anderson to our wedding. Then came the wedding day. The ceremony was progressing smoothly. My emotional dad was bawling, and even the CEO had tears in his eyes. The colleagues who used to make fun of me didn't seem too pleased to be there. Given that it was a joyous occasion and both the CEO and my father were present, I thought there wouldn't be any disruptions. But then I overheard them. They were gathered together, whispering,
"I heard he only has a high school diploma. Nice ceremony, though."
Clearly, they were mocking me. Even on such a day, they have to gossip. I was taken aback. From a distance, I saw Anderson approach Catherine. I panicked. If they ridiculed Catherine as well, I wouldn't be able to stand it. Just as I was about to rush over, fist clenched, I heard,
"Thank you, Anderson."
Catherine's voice rang out from the microphone. Everyone in the hall turned to look at Catherine and Anderson. After a brief silence, Catherine faced the crowd.
"Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to share a story about Kevin and myself, if that's all right."
She continued. I was taken aback. This wasn't in the wedding program. The hall went quiet.
Kevin joined our company a few years ago. He's been diligent and sincere, which I believe is why I fell for him. But there were colleagues who didn't think well of Kevin. I'm talking about you people. You often ridiculed him with the word high school graduate, didn't you?
Catherine pointed to the colleagues who had been whispering earlier. A murmur spread through the crowd. Trying to deflect the attention, those colleagues laughed nervously and said, "No, you got it wrong." Catherine continued.
People who judge others by their educational background are narrow-minded. Ironically, Kevin is now more valuable to the company than you are. But despite all the insults and slander, Kevin has endured and worked hard up to this point.
She then turned to Anderson.
We might not have made it this far without the support of some people. Anderson, thanks to you, we are able to celebrate this day.
This was a shocker. Everyone knew Anderson was the biggest critic of Kevin. As murmurs filled the room, Catherine continued.
I know some of you may be surprised, but it's all true. Anderson always teased Kevin, my husband. On the surface, he ridiculed him as a high school graduate, just like those employees over there. But, Anderson, I happened to eavesdrop. You mocked my husband on purpose to prevent others from getting too heated and gossiping about the other employees, didn't you?
Anderson's eyes went wide with surprise. Even Kevin couldn't help but exclaim, "What?"
It was by chance. I intended to give Anderson a piece of my mind, but I overheard him talking with other employees. Anderson, you said it, didn't you? He might have only graduated from high school, but he's got potential. He's too good to go to waste in a place like this.
It should have been easy to call out the gossiping employees, but doing so would probably only increase the number of harsh words and harassments directed at me. It turned out that Anderson had deliberately acted in a way that mocked me the most to divert the attention. I was misunderstood by everyone, but Anderson willingly took that role.
So, Anderson, I want to express my gratitude. Without you, we wouldn't have come this far. Thank you for awkwardly standing up for my husband.
Catherine said, tears forming in her eyes and a smile on her face. I couldn't hold back my tears. I had been unaware of Anderson's, my former boss's, clumsy affection. I rushed over to Catherine and Anderson. Catherine handed me the microphone. Our eyes met, and she seemed to say, "You have something to say, don't you?" With tears streaming down my face, I mustered up the strength to say, "Anderson, thank you so much." That was all I could manage. To be honest, I hadn't even processed my emotions yet, but in a split second, Catherine proved that he wasn't the bad guy. From somewhere in the room, perhaps my father, applause began to fill the venue. Anderson looked a bit uncomfortable, but he also looked pleased. Before I knew it, the gossiping employees had swiftly exited the venue. I was sobbing, repeating Anderson, Anderson. When he told me, "Hey, today's your big day. Get on with the ceremony," with a bemused smile. The ceremony proceeded smoothly after that commotion and soon concluded. And at work, there were no more employees mocking me as the high school grad. Whether they learned their lesson from Catherine's words or genuinely reflected on their behavior was unclear. A few years later, laughter echoed from an apartment.
Hey, Kevin, how the heck do you hold a baby?
Anderson's panicked voice, Catherine and my father's laughter, and then there was me. Ever since that wedding day misunderstanding was cleared up, I had wanted to express my gratitude to Anderson, so Catherine and I often invited him for dinner and got closer.
You really are something. After all the times I mocked you.
Anderson remarked with a wry smile, to which I responded, "I wouldn't be where I am today without you, Anderson. Be proud of that." Meanwhile, Catherine was laughing hysterically on the side. A few years after that wedding, Catherine and I had a child. Today, Anderson and my father were visiting our home. Even after the wedding, my father had repeatedly thanked Anderson, and before we knew it, our families had become close. Anderson, want to try feeding the baby some milk? We'll help. Catherine and I offered. Anderson held our baby carefully and said,
Really? You better help.
His face was panicked but pleased. It was almost unthinkable to see such a change in my old boss, Anderson, which made me chuckle. I loved video games ever since I was in elementary school. Well, you could say I was what they call a nerd. I loved them so much that by the time I was in high school, I started making my own video game. Spending all day locked up in my room working on video game meant I didn't have many close friends, so I was always alone. I don't know if it was because of this or if it's just my personality, but by the time I started learning programming in college, the girls had kindly nicknamed me the skilled but kinda creepy nerd.
Don't worry. You are a winner as long as you are doing what you love, no matter what others say.
My mom, always laughing and saying these words, was so social and cheerful that I sometimes wondered if she really was my real mother. When I was in high school, my dad passed away from cancer, so it's just been two of us. But thanks to my cheerful mom, I never felt lonely. Eventually, I graduated and became a working adult. I landed a job at a major game company, which had been my dream, and I was excited to work there every day. Most of the time, I didn't talk to anyone, just staring at the computer screen all day. This job was perfect for me, and thanks to my salary, I could finally give my mom, who worked as a nanny, a bit of break. But all that ended after 3 years. I was chosen to join a team for a big company-wide project. However, a colleague named John stole my ideas. When I protested to the company, they immediately pressured me to resign. The company chose John, who was popular and got along well with the bosses, over a low-key employee like me. I have never resented my post-social skills more than that period of time. A year has passed since then. I've been job hunting, but I'm still unemployed. Living off my savings, my mom, seeing me just lounging around at home, yelled at me,
"Get off your butt. A young man like you shouldn't be lazing around. It's driving me nuts watching you. Get up and do some work, anything."
She yanked off my blanket and flung the windows wide open. "What do you mean by anything?" In a rush, I snatched back the blanket and wrapped it around myself.
"The company I'm working for is hiring janitors for the building. The boss was saying they're short on men, so I recommended you for the job. You have an interview this evening."
A janitor? I don't want that kind of job.
"Don't be picky. You can't babysit, can you? Now get up."
The blanket was yanked off me again, and I tumbled out of the bed.
"It's not a customer service, so you won't have to deal with people much. And cleaning can be therapeutic. When you're polishing a floor, it's like you're cleansing your soul. It's the perfect job for you right now. Understand? Don't make your mom look bad."
With a stern voice, Mom exited the room humming a tune. Since then, I've been working part-time as a janitor. At first, I was reluctant, but it turned out to be a good job for me. We mostly work in pairs, but usually, we're each on a different floor doing our own thing. There are many senior staff members, and it was nice that the women's staffs were rather quiet. And just like Mom said, the act of mindlessly polishing brought a sense of accomplishment. Looking at the shiny windows and floors felt refreshing. Thanks to the physical work, my daily meals tasted better. I thought I might continue this janitor job when suddenly, trouble happened.
"Hey, aren't you Anderson?"
While I was cleaning in a new building, a voice called out to me. I turned around to see my old coworker, John.
"Definitely, it's Anderson. Why are you dressed like that?"
John laughed loudly, slapping my shoulder. I said nothing and looked down.
"A janitor? Seriously? That's hilarious."
He slapped my shoulder again, and I snapped, "That hurts, you know."
"Sorry, man. But it's good to see you. I work in this company now. After you left, I got headhunted. Remember that software I made? It hit big.
I clenched my fist hearing the software I made. The nerve of him to say it so casually.
This company's been growing super fast. It's hard being in the spotlight as the hitmaker, you know?
Excuse me, I'm working. Leaving John, who was still bragging, I walked away. I had a sinking feeling in my chest and felt miserable. Every day after that, John would mess with me. He'd deliberately bump into me, knocking over buckets or spilling the coffee I was carrying onto the freshly polished hallway. It's the kind of bullying you'd expect from grade schoolers, yet he'd do it every day without getting bored. I just endured it all. I didn't want to pick a fight because it might bring trouble to my mom.
Seems like you've got a lot on your plate, ho.
One evening, while I was absent-mindedly watching TV with a beer, my mom spoke to me. What do you mean a lot?
Don't play dumb. I've heard about it from the chief, you know.
Mom cracked open a can of beer and sat down next to me.
John is that guy who stole your plan in your previous company, right?
I couldn't help but smirk at her way of putting it. It's not a plan, call it an idea.
It's all the same. Besides, I heard the harassment's been pretty bad. Everyone's worried about you.
How do you even know all this? You work in the babysitting department, right?
Don't underestimate my network. Unlike you, I have lots of friends.
She finished her beer and gave me a stern look.
So, aren't you upset to be treated like that by such a guy?
Well, I am upset, but...
Then get back at him with your work.
She stood up and handed me a piece of paper from her work bag. When I looked, it was a flyer that read in bold letters, "Freelancers welcome. Seeking innovative game software."
The lady I'm babysitting for, her mom's the CEO of that company.
You mean the building there? The company name mentioned at the bottom was the same as where I currently work, and where John is.
Yes. When I mentioned you, she gave me this. How about it? A chance to get back at him.
I stared at the flyer, completely absorbed.
Being a janitor is a proper job. But it's not what you really want to do, right? It's about time you got back into the swing of things. If you don't do it now, you're not much of a man.
She gave me a strong pat on the back and then stood up.
Just so you know, the CEO is pretty strict. Don't expect any special treatment just because you're my son. Earn your stripes on your own.
She flashed a thumbs up with a grin and said, "All right, bath time," and started humming a classic song as she walked out of the living room. Feeling ashamed that, at 27, my mom was still introducing me to job opportunities and worrying about me, I decided to give it a shot. I really wanted to prove myself in front of John. That motivation was really strong. Over the next 3 months, I juggled my janitorial duties during the day and immersed myself in software development at night. As time went on, I realized how much I loved this work, and no matter how late I stayed up, I was always excited. Thanks to that, I didn't care less about John's petty pranks. All I could think about was the software. Yes. I finally uploaded my completed software online and let out a deep sigh. The feeling of accomplishment washed over me, and I slept like a log that night. I didn't even notice when Mom put a blanket over me in the middle of the night. A week later, I went to work as usual, but I felt dizzy. I guess pushing myself finally caught up to me, and I could taste the fever in my mouth.
Are you okay? Your face is red.
Ms. Thompson, my colleague, looked at me with concern. I'm sorry. Can I leave after finishing this up?
Of course. I'll talk to Chief.
Ms. Thompson then went upstairs. I filled a bucket with water and lifted it. Suddenly, I felt wobbly and spilled some of the water.
What the hell?
I realized I made a mistake, but it was too late. To make the matter worse, the person I spilled water on was John. I'm so sorry. I'll clean it up right away. As I tried to wipe his pants with a clean towel I had, he said, "Don't touch me, you're disgusting." Pushing my hand away,
I've been thinking, why is a loser like you always around me? Get lost.
even though he was yelling at me, it was my fault, so I kept apologizing. I'm truly sorry.
I'm telling you to get lost. Are you deaf as well as dumb?
John kicked the bucket that was placed nearby. Water splashed all over me.
I've always found you annoying. I'll tell the cleaning company to fire you, so get lost.
Just then,
What's going on here?
a calm female voice spoke, and John and I both looked her way. A stern-looking woman in her late 30s, wearing a beige suit, frowned at me.
Oh, boss.
John hurriedly put the bucket back. The boss. Is she the CEO my mom mentioned?
Well, this janitor splashed water on me.
John stumbled over his words, but the CEO just glanced at him and asked me, "What's your name?" "David Anderson," I replied. The boss's face lit up when I answered.
You're Anderson. This saves me the trouble of reaching out.
The boss pulled out a handkerchief from her bag and began wiping me down. Hey, that's all right. I quickly stepped back, but the boss shook her head. No, I'm about to introduce you to everyone. We can't have our leader looking like this. It'll give everyone a shock. Confused, I looked at her, and she said, "Follow me, and you too, John." Without another word, John and I followed behind the boss. She opened a door with a sign "Product Development" and said, "Everyone, a moment, please." The boss pulled me by the arm to stand next to her. The eyes of about 30 staff members were all on me.
We're starting a big project company-wide and held a competition for software development. We had many excellent entries from within the company, but after a strict selection process, David Anderson's work was chosen.
The room erupted in cheers. I just stood there, dumbfounded.
David used to work for a major game company. He's the real brains behind the hit Xenon's Adventure series. We're honored to have such a valuable talent in our company.
Emphasizing the word real, the boss took a quick glance at John. John's face turned as pale as a ghost.
David will lead the team. We'll inform those who've been selected to be on his team. It's our biggest project this season. Let's make it a success.
Everyone clapped and smiled at me. The sudden turn of events had me completely dumbfounded. Then, the boss extended his right hand to me, whispering, "I'm truly indebted to your mom for all she's done for us. But remember, this is all about your own abilities. I've heard about what John did to you before. You don't have to worry about that here." I finally realized this was all real. In that moment, I felt the tears welling up. "I appreciate it. Thank you." I firmly shook the boss's hand. The boss gave me a big smile and nodded. The sound of warm applause was music to my ears. After that, I was hired full-time. When I greeted the cleaning company's chief, he cheerfully said, "Congratulations."
Mrs. Anderson was really worried about you. Make your mom proud?
That's when I realized just how much my mom cared for me. Always with a smile, seemingly without a care in the world, my mom was always there, worrying about me. The job was tough but fulfilling. Thanks to the boss's leadership, everyone had the freedom to work in a productive environment. We might be a small company now, but I'm sure we'll grow big. I genuinely wanted to give everything for the company. John was in my team, but he didn't show any resistance. In fact, he was working really hard. The boss must have had a serious talk with him. Seeing John, who always acted so smug, working harder than anyone else made me appreciate him a bit more. All of this was thanks to my mom. I thanked her over and over again, asking what I could give her as a gift. After some thought, she responded, "A daughter-in-law and grandchildren." That's a tall order. That's what I thought, but when I said, "I'll do my best," she burst into laughter. My name is Kevin Johnson. My mother raised me single-handedly, and I only know what my dad looks like from pictures. He got addicted to gambling before I was born, and it became too much for my mom, so she divorced him. Mom worked hard to raise me. She would leave early in the morning and come back late at night, and I couldn't muster the courage to tell her that I was being bullied in elementary school. Every day, I was bullied by David, a guy who's known by everyone in town and whose father runs several businesses. He would scribble on my textbooks and shout insults at me. Being timid, I couldn't stand up to the bullying from David and just endured it quietly. The reason I could withstand David's bullying was because of my childhood friend, Susan. Susan was the epitome of studiousness, always wearing her hair in braided pigtails, donning thick glasses, and engrossed in a book. And every day on our way home, she would catch up to me and say with tears in her eyes, "I'm sorry I couldn't help you." Walking home with Susan was the happiest time for me. We'd talk about our favorite books and about our teachers. It was a time so special that it made me forget about the bullying at school. One day, after parting ways with Susan, I returned home to find my usually working mom sitting in a dark room.
"Welcome home,"
she said with a look of sheer exhaustion. The tension in the air made my voice tremble. "What's wrong?"
"I'm sorry. I'm just really tired."
The company where my mom worked was what you'd call a toxic workplace. Every day, Mom was at her wit's end, being yelled at by her boss and forced to do unpaid overtime.
"Kevin, listen. I'm thinking of moving back to our family home. You remember Grandpa and Grandma have that farm, right? I want to help out there and start our life anew. We'll have to move from here and it'll be quite rural, but can you forgive me for making this decision?"
I was taken aback by my mom's teary-eyed proposal. I was sad about not seeing Susan anymore, but the idea of going to school without having to see David's face was appealing. Besides, I couldn't possibly ask my exhausted mom to keep working at her current job. "Mom, it's okay. Let's move to Grandpa and Grandma's place. I'll help out the farm too."
"Thank you, and I'm sorry, Kevin."
Holding back tears, my mom embraced me. While all I could think about was Susan, the moving preparations began right away. Mom quit her job, and it was decided I'd be transferring schools. The teacher allowed me to tell everyone about the moving when I felt it was right, and I thought I had to tell Susan first. On the usual way home, carrying a backpack filled with textbooks that had been scribbled, I heard the familiar voice of Susan calling out, "Kevin."
Did anything bad happen today? Are you okay?
"I'm fine. I didn't get hurt or anything."
That's good.
Behind her thick glasses, Susan's eyes lit up with a smile. I need to tell her about moving. I need to do it quickly. Even though I thought this, it was hard to bring it up. Finally, we reached the usual crossroad where we part ways, and Susan waved as she always did.
"See you tomorrow, Kevin."
"Wait, Susan." She stopped, looking puzzled. I finally mustered up the courage and told Susan, "You know, I'm gonna be moving to my grandparents' place in the countryside, so we won't be able to see each other soon. I won't be able to see Susan anymore. With that thought, the words just slipped out of my mouth. Can we write letters to each other? So, maybe we can meet again someday. Feeling embarrassed, I looked down, but Susan rushed over to me. Holding my hand, she nodded vigorously.
Definitely right. I promise I'll write back. I want to see you again, Kevin.
Tears glistened in Susan's eyes. Seeing Susan saddened by our parting made me so emotional that I felt tears coming. We both teared up as we promised to stay in touch through letters, and then Susan and I went our separate ways. When my transfer was announced at school, David looked uninterested and Susan was in tears. After moving to the countryside, I started helping out on my grandparents' farm with my mom. I didn't have the money for college, so after high school, I got really into farming. Helping out on the farm was fun, and the taste of the vegetables we grew always amazed me. Above all, seeing my mom regain her health and spirits was the best thing for me. I kept in touch with Susan through our casual letters. Sometimes, when I sent her vegetables from the farm, she'd send back homemade treats. Though I wanted to see her, a decade passed without ever mentioning it in my letters. I got used to helping on the farm and began studying agriculture. My grandparents planned to leave the farm to me, and I was living fulfilling days. Amidst this busy yet peaceful life, a letter arrived. It wasn't from Susan, but invitation to an elementary school reunion. The moment I saw the invitation, David's face flashed in my mind. Though it brought back some unpleasant memories, the hope of possibly seeing Susan again made my heart swell, and so I accepted the invitation. The day of the reunion, it was held in a fancy hotel ballroom in the city. I had to wear a formal suit, which I wasn't used to, so I felt rather awkward. What if Susan sees me like this and is disappointed? But if I get to see her, I'd be so happy. I wonder what kind of person she's become. With a mix of anxiety and anticipation in my mind as I walked into the venue, the first thing that caught my eye was David. His face was handsome, and though David was a bully, he was always surrounded by people. This hadn't changed since elementary school, and there were always many people around David. I sneakily sat in a corner of the venue trying to find Susan without being noticed by David. Disappointed by not seeing Susan anywhere, I suddenly heard a teasing voice. "Hey, is that you, Kevin?" David approached and peered into my face.
"Wow, it really is Kevin. How've you been? I've missed picking on you."
I forced a smile at David, who had a mean grin on his face. He probably missed having someone to bully. David's eyes were like that of a child who just got a new toy.
"So, what have you been up to? My dad gave me one of his companies, and now I'm the CEO. It's tough work, especially managing all the employees. Looks like you haven't been through such hardships, huh?"
"Well, I've been farming."
"Farming? Seriously, you're a farmer now?"
With David's loud exclamation, a crowd began to gather around us. I was too scared to lift my face. The thought of being ridiculed for my beloved farming was too much to bear.
"Farming's for po folks. I could never do that. Aren't there bugs? Too gross for me."
I wanted to block out David's taunting laughter, but feeling like he was mocking not just my profession but my family too, anger welled up inside me. "You don't eat vegetables."
"Huh.
If there were no farmers, you wouldn't have vegetables to eat," I retorted with a shaky voice. Back in elementary school, I never stood up to David, but now it seemed to annoy him that I was fighting back. Just as David was about to say something, the door of the hall suddenly opened.
Sorry I'm late.
The tense atmosphere in the room instantly changed as a beautiful woman entered. The beautiful woman, with her gorgeous long hair tied back, quickly brightened up and rushed towards David and me. David greeted her with a warm smile and opened his arms slightly, welcoming her.
Who's she? I don't remember someone that pretty in our school.
Passing by the confident David, the beautiful woman took my hand. I recognized the touch immediately. Susan.
Yes, I've missed you, Kevin.
I was dumbfounded that Susan, with whom I had only communicated through letters, had turned out to be so stunning. As if to suppress the growing joy of our reunion, David exclaimed, "No way."
Susan, is that really you? You've become so beautiful. I didn't recognize you. What are you doing these days?
I work at the front desk of this hotel. I got held up with some work and was running late.
Oh, then you know my dad's company is one of this hotel's clients. The reason we got to have our reunion in such a nice place is thanks to me. If I had known you were working here, I would have come to this hotel way sooner.
As David bragged, Susan tightened her grip on my hand without replying.
Hey, Kevin, I have someone I want you to meet.
Before I could catch up with this sudden turn of events, David exclaimed in a disgruntled voice, "Hey."
Susan, don't waste your time with him. Do you know what this guy's doing now? He's a farmer. A mucky, uncool job. In contrast, I'm a young CEO with a lot of money. You'd have a much better time with me.
David, are you unaware of what Kevin is currently doing?
I told you, he's a farmer.
David looked utterly confused.
You're mistaken. While Kevin is helping out on a farm, he's also attending grad school at New York University, studying agriculture in depth.
What?
David's exclamation of surprise was echoed by murmurs from those around. Before I could intervene, Susan began explaining my situation. I had developed a passion for farming while helping out my grandparents on their farm, with a growing desire to cultivate better crops and improve the agriculture industry. I worked hard and got admitted to NYU. From this year, I have been delving deeper into my agricultural studies at the graduate level. Hearing all this from Susan, David was taken aback. Ignoring David's stunned expression, Susan urged me to stand up from my chair.
Kevin, I told you that there's someone I want you to meet. Brace yourself.
As she smiled warmly, she led me towards the door and called for the hotel manager. When the door opened and the manager walked in, I was lost for words. Though he had aged, there was no doubt that face was the same one I saw in the photo, unmistakably my dad's. "Is that you, Dad?"
Kevin, you've grown up so well.
The manager, "No, my dad," said with a choked-up voice. According to Susan, Dad often talked about his estranged son. After they got divorced, Dad, who was full of regret at the time, started to work at a hotel and worked hard. His dedication was recognized, and he became a manager. Susan heard stories about Dad's son and realized it was me setting up this reunion.
I'm sorry for not being there for you all these years. I wasn't sure if I should face you, but Susan convinced me. I'm glad to see you.
I wanted to meet you too, Dad. I bet Mom would love to see you. So, if you're up for it, come visit our farm sometime. I tried to hide it, but I always felt the void of not having a father. Whenever Mom shared memories of Dad, she seemed lonely. I think if Dad hadn't gotten caught up in gambling, Mom would have wanted to be with him forever. At my invitation, Dad smiled and said thank you. Amidst the applause for the emotional reunion at the reunion venue, Dad walked over to a stunned David.
You must be Mr. Johnson's son. The staff here informed me about all of your actions and words. If someone like you is going to take over, I have to reconsider our dealings with Mr. Johnson's company. I'll be sure to discuss today's events with your father in detail.
David, looking pale as a ghost at these words, quickly apologized.
"I'm so sorry."
Shouting his apology, David hastily left the reunion. Seeing him retreat like that was laughable. considering how everyone had been afraid of such a guy before. This reunion inspired me to ask Susan out on a date, and we began dating shortly after. A few years later, against all odds, I proposed to my first love, Susan, and we got married. After the reunion, on my insistence, my dad visited the farm. My mom was initially surprised, but she's grown to accept the changed man he's become. Lately, they've been spending more time together, and I am secretly hoping that they will remarry. As for David, I heard through the grapevine that he ran the company he inherited from his father into the ground due to his power tripping and lack of preparation. Now, he's undergoing strict training as the heir under his father. I know that with dedication, anything can bear fruit, just like the effort put into growing tasty vegetables. I sincerely hope that David's efforts will one day pay off, and I'm cheering him on from afar.